married the most feared man in the city on a rainy Thursday in October. And for the first 6 months of our marriage, I thought I had made the most beautiful mistake a woman could make. People always describe fear as something loud. They speak of sirens, screams, gunshots, doors kicked open in the dark, but the fear that lived around my husband was silent. It entered a room before he did, made men lower their voices, straighten their backs, and choose each word as if it might be the last one they ever said. It made women move their eyes away too fast, pretending not to stare, even when everyone stared at him. Made bodyguards check corners twice and drivers keep engines running. It made waiters tremble when they poured his wine. And yet the first thing I noticed about him was not his violence, or his reputation, or the whispered way people said his name as if it could summon trouble by itself. It was how tired he looked. No one else seemed to see it. They saw the black suits cut perfectly to his broad frame, the heavy watch at his wrist, the scar near his jaw, the ruthless patience in his eyes. They saw a king in an underworld made of blood and money and silence. I saw a man who wore control so tightly that I wondered whether it hurt. The night we met, he stood alone on the terrace of a charity gala I had attended only because my aunt insisted that wealthy men occasionally had brothers, sons, and cousins worth marrying. I remember the city lights shivering over the river, the thin cold of autumn rising through my satin shoes, and the fact that he had removed his tie without loosening the top button of his shirt, as if even exhaustion had rules where he came from. I stepped outside because the ballroom felt suffocating. He turned when the door opened, and for one strange heartbeat I thought he looked startled, as if he had expected an enemy, and found a woman with aching feet instead. "You can stay," he said before I could apologize and retreat. His voice was low, controlled, almost indifferent. But it was not cruel. So I stayed. I stood at the opposite end of the terrace and rubbed my arms against the cold. After a minute he took off his coat and held it out to me without comment. I stared at it. "You don't even know me. You look cold. Maybe I like being cold." At that, the corner of his mouth shifted. Not a smile, just the shadow of one. "No," he said, "you don't." I should have recognized then that this was how he loved. Quietly, accurately, as if care were a fact rather than a performance. Instead, I thought he was merely observant. I did not know who he was until later that night, when my aunt nearly dropped her champagne flute after seeing me return to the ballroom wearing his coat. "Take that off," she whispered, dragging me toward the powder room. "Do you have any idea whose jacket that is?" "Rude man's with impossible manners," I said. She went pale. "That is Matteo De Luca's jacket." The name meant nothing to me then. It meant everything to everyone else. By the end of the night, I had learned enough to understand why half the city feared him, and the other half owed him favors they would never speak aloud. Matteo controlled territories, ports, shipments, debt, and loyalty with a precision that made judges nervous and politicians charming. Men disappeared for crossing him. Businesses rose because he allowed it. Families survived because he protected them or vanished because he did not. It began with a man who never wasted words and a woman who didn't understand that he was already trying. For 3 months he courted me in ways no one else would have recognized as courtship. He sent my favorite pastries from the bakery 2 streets from my apartment, though I had mentioned only once that they reminded me of my mother. My broken radiator was repaired the morning after I complained about it to my aunt on the phone, though I had no idea how he knew. When my former landlord tried to keep my deposit without reason, the money appeared in my account by noon, and the landlord sent a written apology so elaborate it sounded drafted by a lawyer trembling for his life. "Very little," he said. At the time, I thought the answer proved how cold he was. I know now that he was lying to protect the few things he could not bear to lose. "Come live with me," he said. "Marry me." I set down the mug I was holding, because my hand had suddenly become unsteady. "Matteo, I can protect you better if you're with me." So I said yes. Life in his mansion taught me the geography of his silence. First time I heard one of his men speak about him with something close to reverence was in the kitchen just after Christmas. I had gone downstairs for tea and found the head guard, Luca, speaking quietly to the cook while waiting for a call. "He hasn't slept," Luca murmured. "Not more than 2 hours at a time all week." The cook crossed himself under his breath. "He'll kill himself before anyone else does." "No," Luca said. "He'll kill everyone else first. Then himself." I froze in the doorway, tea forgotten. They noticed me at once, and both went silent. "Good evening, Signora," Luca said, stepping back with that formal respect every member of the household showed me. The night everything changed began with rain. At 1:17 in the morning, headlights swept across the front drive. Relief hit so fast it made me dizzy. I went to the foyer before the butler could stop me. The front doors opened. Rain-scented air rushed in with the men entering from the portico. Matteo came first. One glance at him, and I knew something was wrong. He was standing, walking, breathing. There was no visible wound, no blood on the marble floor behind him, but his face had a starkness to it I had seen only in churches and hospitals. That peculiar emptiness men wear when pain must be hidden quickly because others are watching. Luca was half a step behind him, his own suit damp from rain, his eyes scanning everything even inside our home. "Everyone out," Matteo said. The staff vanished instantly. I waited until the door shut behind the last guard still inside, leaving only Luca in the foyer and 2 men outside under the portico. Then I crossed to my husband. "What happened?" "Nothing." His answer came too quickly, and then I saw it. A smear of dark blood at the edge of his left cuff, nearly hidden by the black shirt and the low foyer light. My heart dropped. "You're hurt." "It isn't mine." He lied beautifully, but not well enough for me. There was a tightness around his mouth I had never seen before, a shallow, guarded way he held his left arm. A fraction of delay before each breath, as if his body had become a place he was negotiating with. "Take off your jacket," I said. "Elena." "Take it off." He stared at me. Perhaps no one else in his life spoke to him in that tone. Perhaps that was why he obeyed. Very slowly, he slipped off the jacket and handed it to me. The sleeve was heavier than it should have been, wet, warm. When I turned it, the lining gleamed dark red. "Matteo." Luca moved as if to intervene. My husband stopped him with a single glance. "It's a graze," Matteo said. "Nothing vital." I looked up. "And that is supposed to comfort me?" "Yes." "It doesn't." For a moment he swayed almost imperceptibly, fatigue dragging at the edges of his control. Then he straightened again through sheer force of will. "I need to leave again in 10 minutes, he said. That sentence stunned me more than the blood. "No." His brows drew together. "No? You are injured. It is after 1 in the morning. You can barely stand upright." "No." Luca looked as though he was witnessing an event not covered by any of his training. Matteo's gaze locked on mine. In public, men feared that gaze. Tonight, it only made me angrier. "There are things I need to finish," he said. "Then let someone else finish them." "I do not have that luxury. You're married to me. You don't have the luxury of bleeding all over the foyer and leaving again as if that's normal." Something flashed in his expression then, swift and sharp and almost painful. He looked away first. "5 minutes, he said finally. "Then we go." "We?" "You're coming with me." I blinked. "Why?" "Because I said so." "That is not an explanation. It is the only one you are getting right now." "You should go to a hospital," I murmured. "No. You could have lost more blood than you realize." "I didn't." "Why are you always like this?" He looked up at me then. There was weariness in his eyes so stark it pierced straight through my anger. "Because people survive longer when I am," he said. The answer silenced me. 5 minutes later, bandaged and rebuttoned into another black jacket, he was walking toward the armored car waiting beneath the portico. Rain whispered on the stone steps. The driver held the rear door open. Luca stood near the front passenger side, speaking into an earpiece. Matteo paused beside me before we got in. "If I tell you not to look out the windows, will you listen?" "Probably not." Again that nearly smile. "Ain't as a rumor." "At least you're honest." As the car pulled away from the mansion, I turned toward my husband. "I know." Streetlights slid over his face in brief gold strokes, revealing and concealing the hard lines of him. He leaned back, eyes half closed, one hand resting over his bandaged side. I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. "Was it really just a graze?" I asked after a minute. "Yes." "Was someone aiming for you?" A pause. "Yes." My fingers tightened in my lap. "Do you know who?" "Yes." "Will you tell me?" "No." I exhaled slowly through my nose. You're impossible. That has been said before, often, I assume, usually by men about to regret it. I should not have laughed. I did anyway, softly, because his voice was so dry and because humor, however dark, meant he was still himself. He turned his head slightly toward me at the sound. Something in his expression eased. Then silence settled again, not the strained silence of our bedroom after an unresolved conversation. Not the polished silence of public events where every word was weighed. This silence felt different. Heavy, yes, but not hostile. More like a man setting down a burden very carefully because he no longer had the strength to keep carrying it upright. His breathing changed first. I noticed it because I had learned his rhythms the way some women learn music. The breaths grew slower, deeper, then hitched faintly now and then, as if pain kept nudging him awake. He opened his eyes, closed them, opened them again. His hand slid from his side to the seat, as though even holding the wound required more effort than he wanted to admit. Matteo? He didn't answer. I shifted closer. Are you dizzy? No. You look dizzy. I'm sitting down. It is difficult to fall over from here. That is not reassuring. His mouth moved as if he meant to say something else. Instead, his head tipped back against the seat, and he shut his eyes again. Not weak. Never that. Just exhausted beyond concealment. The realization struck me with unexpected force. I had been so busy grieving what he did not give me that I had not fully understood the cost of what he gave everyone else. Command. Control. Ruthlessness. Protection. Certainty. Men like Matteo were expected to be engines of will. They were not allowed to fray. I looked at the hard set of his shoulders and thought, with a sudden painful tenderness, that he must be so tired of being indestructible for other people. The city thinned as we crossed downtown. Glass towers gave way to older blocks, quieter streets, shuttered storefronts gleaming with rain. Somewhere ahead, Luca spoke softly to the driver through the partition, giving directions I couldn't hear. Matteo lifted a hand to rub once at the back of his neck. It was a small, human gesture, absurdly intimate in its carelessness. Then his arm dropped. Without warning, he shifted sideways. At first, I thought the pain had finally hit him. I reached out instinctively, but before I could ask what was wrong, his head lowered and came to rest in my lap. I went completely still, his cheek pressed against the green silk of my dress. One broad shoulder leaned into my hip. His eyes closed, not with the surrender of sleep, but with the fragile control of a man who had reached the limit of holding himself together and chosen, for one dangerous minute, to stop pretending. The breath left my lungs. Matteo De Luca, the man who terrified judges and criminals alike, had put his head in my lap as if there were nowhere else on earth he wanted to be. Through the front partition window, I saw movement. Luca had turned slightly in his seat. The driver glanced up into the mirror. They froze. Even through glass and dim light, I could read the shock on both their faces. Their boss had probably never leaned on anyone in front of them, never shown pain, never asked for comfort, never given them reason to imagine he needed any human softness at all. I looked back down at him, suddenly afraid to breathe too hard. His lashes were damp from rain. A pulse beat steadily in his throat. One hand lay open on the seat beside him, inches from mine, as if he had reached out and changed his mind. Unsure whether he was asleep, delirious, or simply done with the night, I hesitated before lifting my hand. Then I placed my fingers carefully in his hair. It was softer than I expected. At the first pass of my hand, his brows drew together, not in displeasure but in something like relief so sharp it hurt me to see. His lips parted. Breath left him, slow and unguarded. "Don't move," he whispered. The words were so quiet I nearly thought I imagined them. My throat tightened. "I'm not moving." He settled more fully against me. Outside the windows, city lights streaked gold and white through rain. Inside the car, the world narrowed to the warmth of his head on my lap, the rise and fall of his shoulders, the careful rhythm of my fingers combing through his dark hair. I had imagined so many moments with my husband. Angry confessions, passionate apologies, a dramatic declaration in a doorway. I had never imagined this. Never imagined that what would undo me was not a grand gesture, but trust so complete. He placed his vulnerability in my hands and asked only that I stay still. I kept stroking his hair, slowly, the way my mother used to soothe me when I was sick as a child. After a long minute I said softly, "Are you in pain?" Yes. The honesty startled me. Do you want to turn back? No, you're impossible, I murmured again, though there was no irritation in it now. His hand moved across the seat until it found mine. He did not lace our fingers together. Matteo was never careless even in tenderness, but he rested his palm over my hand, heavy and warm, and that nearly broke me. The driver kept his eyes rigidly on the road. Luca, to his credit, did the same after his first stunned glance. But I could feel the awareness in the front seats like static. Let them see, I thought suddenly. Let them see that the man they fear is still a man. Let them see that the wife they think he protects like property is the one place he lays down his weapons. I bent my head slightly. How long have you been awake? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then, with his eyes still closed, he said, 3 nights, not properly. My heart clenched. 3 nights? A little here and there. His thumb brushed once over my knuckles. Not enough. Why didn't you tell me? I heard the smallest change in his breathing, like someone touching a bruise. Because if I say it out loud, he murmured, then it becomes real. It is real whether you say it or not. I know. My fingers continued their path through his hair, slower now, gentler. I wondered when he had last allowed anyone to take care of him. Maybe never. Maybe not since childhood. Maybe not even then. You should have come to me, I said. His answer was almost lost beneath the sound of rain. I am here now. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. For months I had been asking, in 100 different ways, whether there was a place for me inside his life beyond the perimeter of what he guarded. And here he was, telling me without performance that when his strength failed, he came to me. The truth of it felt too large to hold all at once. I swallowed hard. Why now? He opened his eyes then, only a little, enough to look up at me from where he lay. The expression in them was stripped bare by fatigue. Because you're the only place where I don't have to be strong, he said. Everything inside me went silent. Not the car. Not the rain. Me. Those words moved through me like a key turning in a long-locked door. I had wanted him to say he loved me. I had wanted romance in a language I understood, but this confession from a man like Matteo, felt larger, rarer, almost holy. Men who build themselves into fortresses do not reveal where the gates are. And he had just laid himself across mine. I looked down at him, at the hard man the world knew and the exhausted one only I did, and whispered, Matteo. He shut his eyes again. I know. No, you don't. My voice trembled despite my effort to steady it. You don't know what that does to me. His jaw shifted faintly. Then tell me. I laughed once through the sting in my eyes. You first. He was silent. I thought perhaps I had asked too much too soon, that the wall would rise again even here, but the hand over mine tightened slightly, and after a while he spoke in the careful tone of a man unsealing something he had buried for years. When we married, he said, you thought I was cold. It was not a question. Yes, I admitted. Good. I blinked. Good. That was the point. For a second I could only stare. He exhaled, eyes still closed, as if even this much honesty required effort. If anyone watched us, I wanted them to believe there was distance. That you mattered less than you did. That you were ornamental, untouchable, because you were mine, but not essential. My fingers stilled in his hair. You wanted people to think you didn't love me. Yes. The word landed like a stone in deep water. Why? He swallowed once before answering. Because men like my enemies study weakness. They listen, they wait. They learn what name changes my voice, what face makes me reckless, what absence would break my concentration at the wrong moment. His grip on my hand grew colder, tighter. If they had seen what I felt for you too early, they would have used it. I could barely breathe, all those months. The distance. The restraint. The careful public coldness that had wounded me in private. Not indifference. Strategy. Terrible, painful strategy. You should have told me, I whispered. His mouth curved in something bitter. Told you what? That the safest way to love you was to let you think I didn't know how. The tears I had been holding slipped free. I hated crying when he could feel it in the shaking of my hand. But I could not stop. Yes, I said. That exactly. He went very still against me. Then, slowly, he turned his face into my stomach as if seeking a deeper shelter from the world and from the consequences of his own choices. I didn't know how to tell you without making the danger real for you, he said. I kept thinking I would wait until things calmed down. They never do. I brushed damp hair from his forehead. So you let me believe I was alone while standing right beside me? Yes, there was no defense in him. No attempt to justify. Only weary truth. That was cruel, I whispered. His voice was almost inaudible. I know. I stared out at the rain-blurred city, trying to hold the ache and revelation together. Suddenly so many small memories rearranged themselves. The way he always knew where I was in a crowded room without seeming to look. The second set of security cameras added after I mentioned taking walks in the East Garden. The driver who happened to appear whenever I lingered too long in town. The strange timing of his arrivals outside my studio when storms frightened me. The nights he stood at the window after I had supposedly fallen asleep. Not surveillance born of control. Vigilance born of fear. How long? I asked. He knew what I meant. Since the terrace, he said. I looked down sharply. He opened his eyes again, meeting mine. I knew the night I met you, he said. The car seemed to tilt beneath me. Knew what? His gaze held mine with a steadiness that made my chest hurt. That wanting you would be catastrophic. A pause. I wanted you anyway. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. That is not the same as love. No, he said. It was earlier than love, more dangerous because I recognized it before I had earned the right to it. The world beyond the glass disappeared. There was only him and the unbearable tenderness in the exhaustion-stripped truth of his face. Then why marry me? I asked, voicing the question that had lived like a shard inside me since the night he proposed. Really, why? Not the version about protection, not the tactical answer. Why me? He studied me from where he lay, and for the first time since I had known him, Matteo looked uncertain, not of himself. Of how much truth another person could survive hearing. When he spoke, his voice was rougher. Because you were the first person who ever made me want to come home. If he had shot me, I think it would have hurt less. Something inside me broke open so suddenly, so completely, that I bowed over him with a sob before I could stop myself. My free hand covered my mouth. Tears fell onto his black shirt. For one startled second he looked almost alarmed, as though he regretted saying it because he had wounded me. Alina, don't, I said, laughing shakily through tears. Don't say anything else for 1 second or I might actually die. Breath that might have been a laugh escaped him. Tiny. Disbelieving. Precious. I bent and pressed my lips to his forehead. His eyes closed at once. There, in the armored car with armed men in front, and danger somewhere still unfinished ahead of us, my husband finally told me the truth I had feared did not exist. And the truth was not small. It was not reluctant. It was not convenient. It was enormous. I stroked his hair again until his breathing steadied. After a while I said softly, "Do you watch me sleep?" One eyelid lifted a fraction. Suspicion flickered through the weariness. "Who told you that?" "No one. Answer me." He hesitated just long enough to confirm it. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Sometimes?" "Often." "Often." "Matteo, I like knowing you're there." Another tear slipped loose. "You impossible man." He seemed to consider that. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true. And yet you married me." I am starting to think I may be the irrational one in this relationship. This time he did laugh, barely more than an exhale, but the sound transformed his whole face. It made him younger and somehow more dangerous, because a man who could laugh like that and still order empires was difficult to survive loving. We drove in silence for another stretch, but now it was a different silence entirely. Filled, not empty. Tender, not guarded. The car no longer felt like a chamber of armor but like a confessional moving through rain. At some point the partition lowered an inch, and Luca's voice came, carefully neutral. 5 minutes. Matteo did not lift his head. Change of plan. Luca paused. Boss? Take us to the warehouse on Pier 9. You and the others finish it. Another pause, longer this time. I imagined Luca looking into the rearview mirror, taking in his boss lying across my lap, and drawing conclusions he would never speak aloud. Understood, he said. The partition rose again. I looked down at Matteo. You're delegating. Should I be frightened? You should be honored. I am astonished. That too. His eyes were closed again, but I felt the faint curve at one corner of his mouth. Then the curve faded, and the weight of exhaustion returned more heavily than before. Sleep, I whispered. Can't. Why not, Babette? If I sleep, I won't hear if something happens. My chest tightened. Something will not happen. Not here. He did not answer, though I bent closer and said against his hair, I am here. Luca is here. Half the city is probably armed for you at this point. You can close your eyes for 10 minutes without the empire collapsing. That sounds optimistic. That sounds like your wife giving you an order. At that, he opened one eye. My wife gives orders now? Only intelligent ones. That narrows the field. I gasped in mock offense. He actually smiled, very slightly. Then the smile disappeared into weariness. 10 minutes, he murmured. Good. I resumed stroking his hair. This time his body yielded more fully, the rigid set of his shoulders slowly loosening. A minute passed. Then another. His breathing deepened. He did not exactly sleep. Men like Matteo probably never surrendered so completely when danger remained unresolved, but he drifted somewhere near it, into that fragile borderland where muscles unclench and thought softens and trust does the work vigilance cannot. I sat absolutely still, aware of every mile, every turn, every streetlight painting brief patterns over the cabin. The rain eased. The city outside grew sparse and industrial. My legs began to ache beneath his weight, and I did not care. I would have held him there until morning if he needed it. For the first time since our wedding, I understood that love had been present from the beginning, not in the form I expected, not spoken in the language I knew, but there, patient and ferocious beneath every careful distance. He had not withheld himself because he felt nothing. He had withheld himself because he felt too much. The tragedy was that he believed protecting me required depriving us both. The miracle was that tonight, he had finally run out of strength to maintain the lie. When the car slowed, Matteo stirred at once, instinct snapping him back toward alertness. His eyes opened. He did not lift his head immediately. Where are we? He asked. Apparently near a warehouse on Pier 9, I said. Voices murmured faintly outside. I heard other car doors, men's footsteps on wet concrete, the distant cry of gulls over the harbor. Matteo drew one slow breath and then finally sat up. The absence of his weight left my lap suddenly cold. He looked at me as if he were not entirely sure what had just happened was real. Perhaps he regretted it already. The thought pierced me, but then he lifted his hand and touched my cheek with 2 fingers, brushing away the tear tracks I had forgotten were there. I did not mean to make you cry, he said. You didn't. I gave him a watery smile. You meant to ruin the rest of my life by setting the standard impossibly high. For a heartbeat he only stared. Then something warm and unguarded passed through his gaze. That can be arranged, he said. I laughed softly. There he is. His thumb lingered once beneath my eye before his hand fell away. Outside, a knock sounded against the partition. Luca, no doubt, waiting for instructions but politely refusing to witness more than necessary. Matteo pressed the intercom. Yes, we are secure for the moment, Luca said. No rush. No rush. I looked toward the front in surprise. Through the partition glass I could see only the back of Luca's head, rigidly turned away, but the meaning of the words settled over me with unexpected emotion. He had seen enough to understand. Maybe, for the first time, he was not protecting only his boss. He was protecting this moment. Matteo's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a rare acknowledgement of gratitude he would never voice outright. Another minute, he said. Horse, Luca replied. The line clicked off. My husband leaned back against the seat and closed his eyes briefly, though even the decision to delay the outside world for 60 seconds cost something. When he opened them again, he looked at me with a steadiness I had been starving for. I should have told you sooner, he said. Yes. Yes. I know. I was lonely, Matteo. The words left my mouth before I could soften them. His face changed, not defensiveness. Pain. I know that too, he said quietly. Did you? Every time you stopped waiting up, every time you smiled at me politely instead of touching me first. Every time you thanked me for something instead of arguing with me about it. He glanced down at his hands. You only get formal with me when you're hurt. I stared at him, stunned by the precision of it. Of course he had noticed. Matteo noticed everything. Then why didn't you fix it? A muscle moved in his jaw, because each time I almost did, I imagined someone taking you from me because I had been selfish enough to make my feelings visible. He met my gaze again. I chose your safety over your understanding. And over your own happiness? A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. That part was easier. My eyes stung again. I reached for his hand, and this time laced our fingers together deliberately, leaving him no room to retreat into careful half gestures. Listen to me, I said. I don't want safety if it means living beside a stranger who loves me in secret. I want the truth, even when it's frightening. Especially then. He held my gaze for a long second. You say that now. I say that always. You just didn't let me. Something in him seemed to go still around those words, as if they landed in a place no one else could reach. Outside, the rain had dwindled to a mist. Harbor lights shimmered on the wet pavement. Somewhere nearby, men waited for orders, for violence, for business, for the hard man the city recognized. Inside the car, I squeezed his hand. Out there, I said, echoing the boundary I had finally begun to understand. You can be whatever they need. But not with me. His thumb stroked once across my knuckles. No? No? With me, you are allowed to be tired, or angry, or in pain, or impossible. One brow lifted faintly. Impossible seems non-negotiable. True, but the rest matters too. I drew a breath. You don't have to earn tenderness from me by surviving more than anyone should. His eyes darkened with something raw and unreadable. Elena. No, let me finish. I've spent months imagining I was unloved because you were silent. I am not doing that anymore. If you are hurting, you come to me. If you are afraid, you tell me. You need 10 minutes with your head in my lap while your men question the laws of nature, then that's where you put it. Understood? For a second, I thought he might laugh. Instead, he looked at me like a man whose entire world had shifted half an inch and would never settle back the same. Understood, he said. A knot in my chest loosened that I had not realized was still there. He lifted our joined hands and pressed his mouth lightly to my fingers. It was not a public kiss, not one designed to impress witnesses. It was reverent and private and devastating. Stay beside me tonight, he said. I smiled through the last of my tears. Where else would I be? He leaned his forehead against mine, eyes closing. With me, he murmured. I always wonder whether I have already asked too much. The confession was so quiet, I nearly missed it. I answered just as softly. You haven't asked enough. He opened his eyes. There are moments when love stops being a question and becomes a fact, not because uncertainty vanishes, but because something deeper than doubt finally speaks with authority. Looking at him in that dark car, I knew I would remember the exact shade of his gaze for the rest of my life. A soft buzz sounded from his watch, time calling him back to duty. He exhaled and straightened, the boss reassembling himself piece by piece. But something had changed even in that transformation. The armor returned, yes, but it no longer felt impenetrable to me. I had seen the man inside it. More importantly, he had let me. He reached for the door handle, then stopped and looked at me again. When this is finished, he said, we go home. Home. Not the mansion, not the estate. Home. I nodded. He knocked once on the partition. Luca opened the rear door immediately, wet harbor air rushing in. Matteo stepped out first. His posture was straight again, his face composed into the cold authority that made seasoned criminals forget how to breathe. More men waited nearby beneath the warehouse awning. All of them looked at him. Then, almost involuntarily, several of them looked at me, or rather at my lap, my tear-bright face, the soft disarray of my dress where his head had rested. They knew. Maybe not every word, but enough. Enough to understand that their boss had revealed a part of himself none of them had imagined existed. Luca stood closest. His expression remained professionally blank, yet something like respect had deepened there into a new shape. Not for Matteo alone. For us. My husband bent slightly before the door shut, one hand braced on the roof of the car. 5 minutes, he said. That sounds optimistic, I replied, his mouth curved. Wait for me anyway. Always. The word slipped out before I could think better of it. His gaze changed instantly, turning dark and intent in a way that made the harbor, the guards, the entire wet night disappear. Then he nodded once and stepped back. Luca closed the door. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched Matteo walk toward the warehouse with his men falling into place around him. He did not limp, though I knew the graze must still hurt. He did not look back. He did not need to. Some part of him remained with me in the car. Some part of me walked beside him into danger. 5 minutes became 23. I spent them sitting very still, replaying every word, every glance, every year of our marriage rearranged by new understanding. More than once I touched the fabric of my dress where his cheek had been, absurdly unwilling to smooth it flat. At last the warehouse door opened. Voices approached. Matteo emerged under the awning, flanked by Luca and the others. Even through tinted glass, I could tell the hard business was done, not because he looked relieved. Men like him rarely did. But because the violence in the set of his shoulders had quieted into decision. He got back into the car smelling of cold air, rain, and faint cordite. I did not ask what had happened. Is it over? I asked. For tonight, that was enough. As the car turned toward home, he reached for my hand again and held it the entire drive. No explanation offered to the men in front. No attempt to hide it if the partition shifted. Just his large hand wrapped around mine as the city lights thinned and the roads grew quieter. Halfway back, he said, without looking at me, "You can ask me one question." I smiled. Only one? If I allow more, you'll start getting ideas. Too late. I already have many ideas. I considered him. All right. Why did you kiss my hand before you left tonight? He glanced at me, surprised. Perhaps he had expected a question about enemies or names or bullets. Because I had a bad feeling, he said after a moment. And if something went wrong, I wanted the last thing I did before leaving to be gentle with you. That answer nearly undid me more than the others. I turned my face toward the window until I trusted my voice again. Then next time, I said, kiss me properly. He went still. Slowly, he turned toward me. The cabin light caught the gold in his eyes. Is that an order too, Mia Mowgli? My wife. He had called me that countless times before, yet tonight the words felt different. Less like a title, more like a vow. Yes, I said. He released my hand only long enough to cut my face. Then he kissed me. Not carefully. Not briefly. Not the formal, measured kiss of a wedding chapel filled with witnesses. This kiss was tired and deep and aching with all the restraint he had practiced for too long. It tasted faintly of whiskey and rain, and the edge of pain he was still enduring. I felt gratitude in it, apology in it, hunger in it, and something more devastating than all three. Home. When he pulled back, my heart was pounding. Better? He asked, voice low. Dangerously so. He looked almost pleased with himself, which on Matteo was a rare and beautiful sight. The mansion gates opened before us. Gravel hissed beneath the tires. Lights glowed warm in the windows, turning the old stone house into something softer than it had ever seemed before. When the driver stopped under the portico, Matteo did not move immediately. Neither did I. He leaned back, gaze on the rain beyond the windshield. Another minute, he said. I smiled. You just ordered 20 men around a harbor after being shot at. And now you need another minute? Yes, all right. He looked at me then with a seriousness that erased the lightness of the moment. Out there, I'm their boss, he said. The sentence hung between us, unfinished and yet instantly familiar. I answered before he could. With me, you're just my husband. Something in his face eased so completely that I knew I had given him exactly the words he needed. He leaned toward me. I kissed his forehead first, because it felt right, and then his mouth. I won't mistake your silence for lack of love again, I whispered, his fingers closed around mine. And I won't use silence as protection when the truth belongs to you. It was not a poetic vow, It was better. Together we got out of the car. The household pretended not to notice the way Matteo kept his hand at my waist all the way upstairs, or how I remained at his side while Marta checked the bandage once more, or how he refused pain medication, until I promised I would stay in bed beside him and wake him if the bleeding worsened. That night, after the room went dark and rain softened against the windows, he lay on his back for a long time staring at the ceiling. I turned onto my side and touched his arm. "What are you thinking?" "That I should have said it sooner." "Yes," I said, too sleepy and honest for diplomacy. He huffed a quiet laugh. I traced the line of his wrist. "What are you really thinking?" After a pause, he said, "That if I had known being loved well felt like this, I might have become a better man much earlier." I rested my head on his shoulder carefully, mindful of the wound. "I don't need a better man." "No?" "No. I need you alive and honest, preferably both at once." His hand came up to cradle the back of my head. In the darkness, his voice was almost boyishly bewildered. "You make demands. Terrible ones. I married a tyrant. And yet you came home to me anyway." He fell silent after that, but it was a warm silence, threaded through with the slow easing of a man finally allowing himself rest. Before sleep took me, I felt him kiss my hair. Months passed. Not without danger. Men like Matteo do not step out of their world because of one confession in one car. There were still late nights, armed convoys, tense phone calls cut short when I entered a room, and news stories that carefully omitted the names everyone already knew. His enemies did not vanish because he had learned tenderness. But our marriage changed in ways both subtle and profound. He began telling me when he would be late, not details but truths. "Rough night. Stay inside tomorrow. I may need quiet when I get home." Each message felt like trust deposited where silence used to be. I stopped translating his distance as rejection. When he stood at the bedroom window, I rose and joined him. Sometimes he put an arm around me without speaking. Sometimes he told me which storm system was moving in over the sea, or which politician was lying on television. Sometimes he said nothing at all, and I learned that shared quiet can be intimacy when both people know it is shared on purpose. He slept better with my hand on his chest. I discovered this by accident one restless night, and then pretended not to notice the next 3 times he drew my hand there in his sleep. He still struggled with words. That did not change. But I began to hear all the others' ways he spoke. The tea waiting when I came in from the garden chilled. The way he moved me to the inside of the sidewalk without breaking conversation. The new lock on my studio after a distant threat I never fully learned about. The fact that if I yawned once after dinner, he would have a blanket around my shoulders within minutes. And, sometimes, after nights that stretched too long and cost him too much, he would come find me without preamble, loosen the knot of his tie, and rest his head in my lap while I sat on the sofa in our private sitting room. The first time it happened after the car, Luca himself was the one who opened the study door for him. My husband walked in looking carved from exhaustion, nodded once to dismiss the guard, and crossed straight to where I sat reading. Without a word, he lowered himself beside me, and then down until his head rested across my thighs. I smiled and set the book aside. "Long night?" I asked. "Terrible." "Anyone dead?" "Only if they made poor decisions." "That usually means yes." I threaded my fingers through his hair. Within seconds, his whole body eased. There was no drama in it anymore. No shock. No revelation. Only us. Till the household noticed. Of course they did. Houses like ours carried stories through walls. Men who once thought their boss carved from granite began to understand that stone could shelter warmth inside it. Not weakness. Never weakness. Trust. And trust, in Matteo's world, was rarer than fear. One late autumn evening, nearly a year after the night in the car, we hosted a dinner for people who smiled too much and meant too little. Matteo spent 3 hours terrifying financiers in perfectly tailored black, while I performed the gentler work of making wives feel safe enough to gossip. By the time the last guest left, the moon was high, and the house smelled of wax and wine and extinguished candles. I went to the small family drawing room to remove my earrings in peace. Through the half-open door, I heard voices in the corridor. Luca, speaking to one of the newer guards. "If he comes in and asks for the signora, you clear the hall." The younger man sounded confused. "Is something wrong?" A pause. Then Luca said, in the tone of a man passing on important operational wisdom. No. Something is right, I smiled to myself before the door opened. Matteo entered, shoulders rigid, cufflinks missing, tie gone. He looked at me only once before crossing the room. Without ceremony he sat beside me on the chaise, then stretched out and rested his head in my lap like a man returning to a sacred habit. I laid my hand in his hair at once. Through the open doorway, 2 guards passing at the far end of the hall slowed. One of them glanced in and then quickly away, but not before I saw the smile tug at his mouth. "You're becoming predictable," I told my husband softly. His eyes stayed closed. A tragedy. For the city, perhaps. For my enemies, certainly. And for me? He opened one eye to look up at me. The hardness the world knew was gone from his face, replaced by that private, almost startled tenderness he wore only with me. "For you," he said. "I hope it becomes a comfort." I bent and kissed his temple. "It already is." A little later, as I continued stroking his hair, I heard the younger guard whisper to Luca from the hall, thinking we couldn't hear. "That's not the man we fear." Luca's answer came low and certain. "No," he said. "That's the man she saved." I looked down at my husband. He had not fallen asleep, but his breathing had deepened, and the lines of strain around his mouth had softened. My feared Mafia husband, my impossible quiet man, the one who had built his life on command and his love on silence, trusted me with the part of himself no one else was allowed to touch. I ran my fingers through his hair again, slow and tender, and watched his eyes close fully this time. Outside our room, the house stood guarded. The city still feared his name. Men still lowered their voices when he entered. Somewhere, no doubt, enemies still measured shadows and made foolish plans. But here, with his head on my lap and my hand in his hair, he was not a legend or a threat or a king of anything at all. He was simply the man who came home to me.